Hello, my name's Clare Murray and I'm managing partner of specialist employment partnership and regulatory law firm CM Murray. And I'm delighted to have here my partner, Andrew Pavlovic, who is our SRA regulatory and professional discipline partner. Hi, Andrew.
Morning.
So we are going to talk briefly about the sort of regulatory rules and issues that firms need to think about and the partners need to think about as well when there are allegations or complaints of potential wrongdoing.
Yeah, so since the rules came in at the end of April, I think the first thing that firms need to establish whenever there is a complaint of unfair treatment, discrimination, harassment is, are the new rules actually engaged, particularly in respect of the requirement to treat colleagues fairly and with respect. Firms need to get to grips with what that actually means in a regulatory context. Second is, once that's been established that the rules are engaged, how is the behaviour going to be challenged? And then the third thing that needs to be considered alongside that is the conduct complained about serious enough to trigger the self-reporting threshold, so that in addition to challenging the behaviour, there might also be a requirement to report the alleged conduct to the SRA.
That's brilliant. Thank you. That's such a really helpful reminder of these three really important regulatory steps. And it's interesting to understand how these are being approached in practice, and if there's any sort of feedback that we're getting from the SRA as well on how they're operating in practice. So what are you seeing so far over the last few months?
I think from advising on some cases that engage these new rules, the first issue we're seeing is, as I mentioned at the outset, trying to establish when behaviour does amount to treating someone unfairly in a regulatory context. I think discrimination and harassment have statutory definitions in the Equality Act, which I think most people are fairly familiar with. And we have a definition of bullying in the ACAS code. But the requirement to treat someone fairly and with respect is a bit more difficult to pin down. We have a case study in the SRA guidance, which refers to a partner speaking in derogatory terms to trainees in front of clients at a firm party where the trainees were supposed to be liaising with the organisers in respect of catering, which personally I don't find to be a particularly practical or helpful example. So trying to get to the bottom of when someone has been deemed to treat someone unfairly with respect, I think is one of the key challenges.
It can be a real grey area, can't it? But we've certainly had scenarios before and after the rule changes where people just make casually negative comments about colleagues in front of clients or even in front of the wider team that people perceive as being disrespectful and potentially bullying.
Yeah. And then moving on to bullying, which is a separate element. I mean, as I say, we do have the ACAS definition. I still think there's this issue about where robust feedback and management crosses the line into bullying. And again, the case studies from the SRA, we have a case study one where a partner was alleged to have questioned a paralegal's time recording in front of other members of the team, and they say that is not an issue that they would get involved with. They say that the question of how feedback is given is a matter for the employment tribunal to determine. But equally, you can see cases which go the other way and stray into bullying. And actually, we've been referring people to the Adam Tolley report on Dominic Raab, because he does a really good job there in setting out the terms of reference, what bullying means, and then going on to apply it and finding that the conduct went further than was reasonably necessary to give feedback and amounted in that case to bullying. So that's been a really useful reference point, I think.
So a good read if anybody's interested in just sort of getting a greater understanding around bullying. But does the SRA give any more helpful guidance about the kind of criteria or the factors that it will take into account in deciding whether or not it will review particular complaints of unfair or treating without respect?
Yeah, so the sort of conduct they say they're interested in is conduct which could reasonably be seen by others to be intended to be belittling or humiliating. They're also concerned about conduct which is are targeted at people with protected characteristics. So those are two sort of areas where they're very much concerned. But again, trying to work out whether something was intended to be belittling and humiliating is quite a difficult thing.
In bullying and harassment, it tends to be this, it's like two aspects. It's whether the person intended it or what was the, in summary, sort of the reasonable perception of the recipient. Whereas you're saying that the SRA is focusing primarily on, at least in non-discriminatory harassment areas, they're focusing on the intention of the person.
Yeah, that's what they indicate as the more serious types of behaviours, and obviously they're interested in serious breaches, and that's the threshold, obviously, for reporting.
So the next element of the discussion really is about challenging behaviour, and this is really interesting. There's been a discussion a long time in the sexual harassment context about bystander training, about not being a passive bystander, because that normalizes behaviors, and instead being a proactive intervener to stop this sort of unfair, harassing behavior from happening. And it's really interesting that the SRA has taken this up and now turned it into a positive obligation on partners in law firms. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit more about that and what we're seeing in practice.
When we were sort of talking about the new rules before they came in, I thought we had in mind a typical scenario where someone is maybe giving a dressing down to a trainee in an open plan office, and another partner has to decide whether or not to step in the moment or after the event. And what we've actually seen in practice is some more nuanced cases. So, for example, what happens if someone comes to you and says, partner X has been treating me unfairly, but there hasn't actually been any witnesses to the alleged discussion? So how do you determine whether that conduct has in fact taken place without conducting an investigation? So we've had some cases where, in order to get to the bottom of whether or not someone has actually violated this rule, you've actually had to have an investigation put in place first. So that's a case where you can't challenge, obviously, at the time because you weren't there. So you firstly need to establish, well, whether did the actual conduct take place in order that you can then challenge it after the event. The alternative would be just to say, I've been informed that person X has told me that you've spoken in this way and I'm challenging that behaviour. The risk of that is obviously you're not giving the partner a chance to comment, because he or she may have a different version of events. So that's one sort of case we've seen where the obligation to challenge has only arisen after the conduct has been reported to you. And that puts you in a difficult position. And one of the things we could see actually, perhaps unintended, is more investigations as a result of this rule.
Although the SRA does say that it can be okay to challenge informally. So it doesn't need to be a formal process. It can be, it can take different shapes and forms in terms of how to do this. So it could be just in the moment, if you do see it, to deflect and divert and basically stop the behaviour happening.
I suppose the issue is then the need to document the challenge. So firms obviously need to be able to demonstrate compliance with the regulatory arrangements under the SRA Code of Conduct for firms, and partners who've challenged behaviour will want to be keen to ensure that that's documented as well.
So, for example, if I saw something, or for example, if you saw me doing something, talking to a colleague that in a way that you felt was inappropriate, but was maybe it was grey, it just gave you that sort of gut feeling of that this isn't right. If you would say to me, Claire, come on, I don't think that's cool. I don't think that's an appropriate way to speak to that person. And you've staged your intervention. I feel suitably chastened. I might give you my feedback as to why, the context as to why I was doing it. And you might, okay, but still, I think there are ways of doing this or not. Is the suggestion then that you take a note of, you do a note of what we've discussed for your records? Or is the proposal that you not only take that note, but that you kind of escalate it, you hand it over, say, to RGC or is it enough for the person in the moment just to speak and to take a note, or do they actually need to pass it up the chain so that someone else can form a view on whether there's any further action required, or whether in fact it shows that it's part of a pattern of behaviour of which you might not otherwise be aware?
Well, it might be enough for the individual partner to be able to satisfy the obligation to say, well, look, I challenged it and here is my note. But from a firm perspective, as you say, if you're trying to pick up patterns of behaviour, then I think you would want some kind of centralised reporting. And that's why one of the things that we've been talking about is firms introducing their own policy around this, particularly as a way of making sure that all complaints when they come in follow a standardised procedure. The SRA talks about who you should report to, whether that should be the GC, the HR director, the COLB, etc., rather than just having people going off to different people every time something happens, standardising that so there's one point of contact. So actually, I think having a policy and making clear that even if there is an informal challenge, that does still need to be passed up centrally for the purpose of demonstrating the firm's compliance with the SRA rules, but also for picking up perhaps on micro behaviours even, but which, you know, if repeated, could present an issue.
I mean, it creates some interpersonal challenges, you know. If you think that your partners will be kind of scrutinising your behaviour and potentially making notes and reporting up, so that can go to the fabric of partnership relationships. But equally, it all comes from a good place in terms of the SRA, and there does need to be some light, you know, kind of brought into, and transparency brought into relationships across a workforce, which might be regarded as harmful and toxic. And if this does this, at least if it's done in a proportionate way, I think a proportionate way, consistent, in line with a policy operated by that firm in their context and with suitable training. And do you want to tell us just a little bit about the kind of training that you've been doing?
Yeah, and I think the training is important for the reason that you said, because this has got the potential to be a bit divisive, you know, if partners are having to report each other. And certainly the training that we provide is very interactive. We have lots of case studies, and we try and get partners to consider these issues as a group, so they can work out between themselves what is and what isn't acceptable. And there's buy-in to the fact that ultimately there may need to be challenges, and it's understood, rather than it being taken as a sort of an offensive gesture if someone has their behaviour challenged, or potentially a challenge to their authority as well. So I think using training as a way of developing that sort of camaraderie in a way between partners, and an understanding of what is and isn't acceptable within the partner group.
And the language that they use between them as a partner body, what is the acceptable language for intervening within their culture? So, famously, one firm used that's not cool. You've obviously got the Sadiq Khan's Mayor of London campaign at the moment with sexual harassment, with sort of, a mate says to a mate, come on, where they see a friend sort of potentially sexually harassing a woman. But so it is about getting the language right and the behaviors right, and understanding as to what works and what doesn't work within that organization. So I think this is more than just a kind of like a cookie cutter approach to training. It actually has to be quite immersed in the culture and language of the particular firm, and their constitution and their policies, etc. I think that's pretty important. I do think it's also important just generally for partners to understand this obligation that they're under, even if it's not partner behavior. I did have someone who I sort of had lunch with recently tell me about something they'd become aware of within the firm. An individual wasn't a partner, and that they casually made some reference to something that they were doing that was clearly actually offensive and in breach of any firm's policies. And they were a bit like, I'm not entirely sure what to do about that. And I was able to say, look, the new rules on you as a partner are that you actually have to challenge and report that behaviour. You can't just sort of sit back and go, oh, well, let's see if someone else picks up on it.
The other thing that we have seen on one occasion as well is email. I think when you think about challenging behaviour, we tend to think about physical interactions, but actually email can be quite an aggressive or a passive aggressive form of communication, depending on who you're communicating with. And you might get the email from the partner in all caps, asking you to do something or castigating you about something at an unsocial hour of the day. So that's something that we've seen. We've been asked to look at. Partners copied to an email from another partner. Does a requirement to challenge arise there? And if so, how is that done? Is it by responding to the email in a group, chain saying, don't think that was appropriate, which is probably not the best way I would have thought of doing it.
Agreed.
Or having a conversation to the one side saying that was unnecessary or that went further than was required.
Let me suggest this, even picking up the phone, because it's the email and messaging is such a dehumanizing form of communication. And there's an intergenerational issue there as well, about which, some generations are more comfortable with telephone and direct conversation than others, who might prefer sort of more message based. But you just lose something of the human understanding and empathy and understanding of the intention of the person who sends the message.
I thought that was an interesting one. Again, one that I hadn't perhaps considered so much before the rules came in. As I say, I think it was more considering human interactions and feedback given in the moment.
So I think this is really valuable. I think the SRA rules and these recommended interventions are really helpful, but they also have to be proportionate, and they also have to be put in a human context as well, and in the context of the firm. So I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. It's really helpful. Andrew is fabulous in this area. Anything SRA regulatory related, whether it's the regulation or the professional discipline. If you want to have an informal chat with him, he's always happy to speak. He's great on this stuff. He has both the really hardcore technical knowledge, but also the frontline experience, and just very, very practical. And also within our wider team, we have a huge amount of joined up experience in dealing with the employment, partnership and regulatory issues as they often happen together on the front line. So if you'd like to talk about any of these issues, if you'd like to talk about some partner behavioural training, some wider firm training, please do get in touch. We love this stuff and we'd love to hear from you and talk with you about it. So thanks again, Andrew. Thanks for watching, and hopefully see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.